Hi, my name is Samuel, and when I die, I want you to mix my ashes into cement, and with it, make a colossal statue of a sky serpent, situated not in the graveyard, but somewhere hidden in my hometown, oriented to the west. Do it, or I will haunt. Just everybody. We now have working crops. There is still a few things I need to complete, and of course there will be myriad different crops in time, but the infrastructure is here. We have flexible mature times based on which crop it is. One can cut down grass-type Pokemon with the sickle, and then they'll float around until they're collected magnetically in true video game fashion. And it all works within the grid system that's already there. It feels like a pretty big step forward, even if these aren't crazy complicated things I've had to figure out. Big tangent. I had this problem, perhaps an invented one. I was paranoid that if I have a system that when the day ticks over, you have thousands of objects doing their own thing, checking for addition tiles when grass spreads, each crop changing its values and sprites, trees growing and dropping branches, water draining and redrawing itself, all on the same frame at the end of each day. I was paranoid that on some devices they would perhaps cause a stutter or at worst actually crash. Not being a programmer in the slightest, I have absolutely no reference for how much strain I should be comfortable putting on a system on any given frame. And of course there are safeguards, and of course each PC has different specs, and I just didn't want people who are running potato builds to have crashes because my slightly less potatoey machine could handle it, where perhaps someone else's couldn't. I say this as a paranoia because I'm actually quite sure that I'm in no danger of this becoming a problem with my tiny pixel art game, with barely any serious mechanics, but I wanted a system nonetheless that will spread out the strain of the day ticking over onto at least several separate steps instead of the same one. I suppose I'm going through all this because I didn't realize that one of my values, I guess, is to make this game as potato-friendly as I know how. Even if I'm going a little overboard. I'm not sure I knew this going in, but it is a real goal of mine. I did get a little anxious over it, so here we are. Self-reporting complete. Let's move on to something which shows my deficits a little less. We have art. Lots of art. After finishing the crops and daytime system, I felt like I deserved some activities which I actually enjoyed, and so I started on some character designs. We have Pam, a cook in the city, Wim, an Avanosu warrior, and this guy, who is a Teresi blacksmith. These characters might show up in dialogue or shop screens, or might have little stories or quests associated, or they could just be poster boys for the game, or you might not see these pictures ever again. I reserve the right to fuss and to faff and to change and throw everything out last minute if I feel like it. Also, we have one of the areas in Versi. This is the port town of Pathapan. Here will be some traders, a camel caravan outpost, a town hall, a blacksmith's, a shipwright, etc. This will be the starting area for your journey in Versi. It took a long time to figure out what kind of workflow I would have doing larger areas like this. I have some tile sprites for less unique areas, and some unique sprites for buildings, landmarks, and so on. I started with a sketch, and then drew the whole thing out on a separate program with scale in mind, and then took bits and pieces into GMS2 to do the detailed work, and then applied them where needed, either as an object, which takes into account its depth, or a sprite, which will appear on the same layer, either above or behind everything else. This took a while. I imagine I will be doing this whole area creation thing quite a lot, so it might take quite a long time. But it's nice to finally start populating areas properly after a while just tinkering with mechanical side of things. Speaking of which, I have been ironing out some kinks with the inventory system, and it seems to be doing okay. It has its moments where it freaks out, but don't we all? A large inspiration to this style of inventory was Darkest Dungeon. I love the combination of having stackable items, but each item has a stack maximum, depending on which item it is, so you can only put so much of a given item in each slot before you need to devote a second slot to it, and so on. It has its frustrations, of course, but frankly, sometimes I want the player to struggle. Speaking of struggling, there's something else I've been tinkering with. A battle system. I made this prototype to see if it's a viable idea, and it looks pretty good. On the surface, it might look like something like a Pokemon battle screen, but this is a bit different. It's real time, so it actually plays more like Punch-Out! For those ancient enough to remember that old gem. So you'll have to intuit when and where the enemy will swing at you, and then wait for your own opportunity to strike between attacks. I know this is a big departure from how the rest of the game looks so far, but oscillating between 1-bit and classic pixel art is something I've been messing with for a while, and it feels like a perfect example of how I can potentially implement it quite well. I also wanted a perspective change for some of the characters, where you'll be able to see more detail as opposed to their overworld sprite, which might be quite small, or opposed to like a shop or a dialogue screen, which might be a bit more static and less dynamic. I'm under no illusions that this is not a mere minigame I'm making here, but I also think it might be a perfect feature to inject a little drama into the gameplay, provide a bit of a test of skill for those masochists like me. There'll be dialogue while you fight, and I'm imagining lots of little character moments playing out during the fight, a bit like Undertale. I'm a bit hesitant to have them as mandatory challenges, like gatekeepers for the story progression, but maybe you'll have to meet the challenge to access rare collectibles, or discover some lore about an area, or a character, for instance. Of all the recent developments, this fight mechanic has been the most exciting to make, partly because I'm feeling a little out of my depth making it. I'm not used to tinkering with this kind of gameplay. So after this prototype, I'm actually quite optimistic that I can make a tight little fighting mechanic for those rare instances of straight up single combat. One last thing, equal parts boring and important, I plumbed in all of the infrastructure I need for the settings menu. While I would love to add more depthy things like accessibility options or localization options, these here are the things I'm currently able to build. Maybe I'll have time to add the more niche things later. And I think that's it. It's been a while between posts again, but progress is staggering along, as always. Be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside. Okay, bye.